whatever initiative you're doing, write down what you think is going to happen and then learn from what actually does. Do not leave it in the world of let's just see what happens. It doesn't help you.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast, where we look to crack the code on growing your business by tackling the challenges that keep revenue leaders up at night. I'm Carl Ortmans, and on today's episode, we're going to dive into a topic that most revenue leaders want to talk about and financial leaders. That topic is bookings. Now, today's podcast is sponsored by the great team at Virtual Causeway. Traditional demand gen is breaking for a lot of teams we talk to on the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast. Now, Virtual Causeway helps fix that by shifting from demand creation to demand positioning. Instead of chasing form fills, they engineer where and how your brand appears when buyers research through AI tools and peer networks. The result? Fewer cold motions, more high-intent conversations, and revenue teams actually spending time with people who want to buy. Check them out at virtualcauseway.com. And don't forget to mention the show for a special rate. Now, my guest today is Simon Drexler. So Simon and I have been friends for, I didn't realize this, Simon, more than 10 years, and we've worked together twice. If you're not familiar with Simon, he's an engineer who's turned revenue executive, and he's shaping the future of industrial automation. He began his career as a project engineer with ATS Automation, building world-class automation, and then rose through the ranks into program manager, and then the head of program management. That experience led him to ClearPath Robotics, where he led the industrial systems product line for self-driving vehicles. Returning to ATS, he led the LMT, the Linear Motion Technology Products Division, and before taking on the role of general manager of the Automation Products Division. Today, he's the president of Samuel Automation, helping companies accelerate automation adoption and solving some of the biggest challenges in automation. He's one of the most genuine and down-to-earth people I know, and I'm incredibly honored to call him as a friend. Welcome to the podcast, Simon. Thank you for joining us.
Carl, thank you so much for having me.
So before we get kicked off, can you maybe share with us a little bit about your world? Like what industries or verticals do you work in? What are the selling motions? What size companies are you working with?
Sure. So at Samuel Automation, we're an automation integrator. And the overall description of that is always a little bit flippant, is we make machines that make things. And so we work with world-class manufacturers to integrate robotics and technology to put together automation systems that build their product. And so we do that with a variety of industries. That might be an automotive component, one of the tiered suppliers or OEM, where we're working to put together maybe a servo motor or a drivetrain as part of automotive assembly. That might be medical device, where we're putting a wearable technology together, or a catheter kit, or a needle, and we're doing the actual assembly of that at volume. Might be consumer products. Every automation integrator does sort of some other things too. So we do some assembly work in the world of energy and carbon capture filters, where we apply our knowledge to solve manufacturing problems with technology and help deploy robotics to the assembly process.
So you're like the how it's made of how it's made.
I have been on how it's made several times, and the equipment that I've been involved in has been on how it's made many times. And so for anyone who's listening, if that's a very good, we make machines that make things. How It's Made is a great show that highlights those machines that are putting products together. And it's an interesting world. I've been in it for my entire career since I got out of university. And you're constantly solving these problems that no one has done before to figure out how to make the next widget, how to support our customers in deploying technology in areas that they haven't deployed it before. And we work to solve those problems with an automation approach and our automation background and expertise, and help them scale their businesses.
If you ever get a chance to go and actually witness something being made, the How It's Made show is very cool. But the way of the sequence of events that happen for something to go together, it's fascinating. And all of the technology that goes into it, the first time I got to see it, it was something that I was blown away by, and it was so far away from SaaS and tech that I'm so used to. And all of a sudden, you see these giant robots putting together these little tiny things, and it spits it out in perfect cadence. It's amazing.
I'm myself, I'm incredibly passionate about the industry, And I think that's one of the best parts about it is you don't often think about how things are made. You know, you use your razor blades in the morning to shave your face, and you never really think about, well, how do hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of those get made every day, and what technology puts them together, and what are the complexities of building something like that at volume. And so not only is that interesting when you start to really think about it, at least for people like myself, I get to travel the whole world and understand manufacturing companies' challenges with scaling their own assembly processes. And then I get to apply the leading technology to that. And that's just an incredible experience. And so being part of this industry has been, I've been so fortunate to be able to travel the four corners of the globe and see a number of different countries and different approaches to manufacturing across every industry on the planet.
I feel like there's a whole other talk and to sit down and learn from you about that, because I now have more questions. But to keep it topical to the bookings, how we got to the topic today is I asked Simon, like I do everybody, what's a successful revenue initiative you've ever led, or an existing challenge you're solving or have solved? And by the time I finished the question, he looked at me and he was like, it's bookings. But more specifically, the cadence of bookings related to growth. So if I can maybe start the conversation this way. So, Simon, how should leaders think about booking cadence as a growth constraint, not just as a sales outcome?
So I think that's an absolutely critical question for anybody trying to grow their business. And so I've always been in the technology world, whether that's industrial automation or Carl had mentioned self-driving vehicles and automation products, but it's the same. If you look at your revenue projection for a quarter, and we'll just easy math, it's 9, and you're expecting $3 million per month, but you actually get $9 million in that third month and nothing in the first 2. That is a very challenging operational condition for your team. And so while you still may have met your sales target, the cadence of growth, that heartbeat of the business, gets disrupted so much when you don't have a consistent stream of sales or bookings coming into the business. And then those operational challenges, what they do is they end up taking a lot of the opportunity time, like the opportunity cost of dealing with the challenges of infrequent bookings, end up taking away from growing the business. So the things that you want to do, the things that you desire to do, the things that will push the organization forward, you're dealing with something that's not value added because you're not seeing that consistent stream. You're not building up that heartbeat.
So is it because, and maybe to sort of set the stage a little bit, with automation and products and the things you're talking about, if tomorrow you talk to somebody and they say, yep, Simon, we want this line and we want to do it, there's a time to deliver and actually assemble things, right? So there's is the cadence that you're talking about of like the sequence of events in order to hit that outcome? Because if you're constantly delayed, is that where, from a resource perspective and also from getting the products, the misalignment and potentially missing the outcome, but you got the bookings, is that sort of what you're alluding to?
And so that's what I'm alluding to in the current business, but I think it applies to others as well. So if I allude to what we do today, so I run an automation integration business. Largely, we're a service provider. And for the vast majority of what we do, from the time that we receive an order to the time that the project is complete, is about 1 year. And so typically, the first group that touches an order for us would be the mechanical design department. And then it would flow from mechanical design to electrical design, starting into the integration teams. And then, the machine kind of progresses and goes out the door. But if we sort of simplify the conversation to just mechanical design, if we're not seeing a consistent cadence of new projects coming in, I only have so much capacity in my mechanical design department. And so I want to see sort of consistent work coming through that group. Now, all of a sudden, if I receive all the projects at once, the demand goes up here. And now I'm either extending my lead time or I'm asking my team to work an unsustainable amount of time. And so that in my world is the challenge. And then the converse of that is if the consistent stream isn't coming in, they have a time frame where they're not doing anything, which isn't good either. It's not good for the team themselves. People like to come to work and be busy. Then it's also not good for utilization measures and things like that as well for the performance of the business. But the topic that we're talking about extends beyond what I do. So what I do right now is capital equipment, and I would say the challenge is maybe more significant. But even in a products-based business, you have the same problem. You only have so much production capacity. You may make a choice to have a little bit of inventory on the shelf, but if you're not seeing a consistent amount of orders, and then all of a sudden you see this big spike, you now run into a number of operational challenges that now you're going to be consuming your management time, your leadership time, dealing with this rather than continuing to grow the business. Like the ideal world is that you're continuously growing your cadence, like you're continuously growing your heartbeat.
So the way that I'm hearing it is if you have these spikes, well, now you have resources, you're over capacity, and then all of a sudden you have this dip, and now the people are kind of sitting around being like, well, what do I do?
Yeah.
And so in the way that we've seen from a SaaS perspective, right? Like there's going to be some months that are great, some months that aren't, but there's no physical product. That's right. So there's a difference. And I think for a lot of the people that have been listening to this podcast is much more around the tech side, and they haven't experienced these things. But there's some. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I see. So you are right. What I'm talking about is absolutely around hard goods. So if you're producing something, or we produce complicated engineered systems, but even if you're producing some sort of hard good, the peaks and valleys, or the feast and famine, it consumes a lot of resources and starts to impact your ability to really grow the business, because it impacts confidence and impacts predictability when you're not kind of keeping up with your expected cadence. But you actually would have, and I think there is a version of that inside of SaaS or the software world as well, because oftentimes as orders come in, you have some level of customization or some level of effort that may be required of your engineering team or your deployment team or anything like that. And so if you aren't seeing that consistent stream, you're going to run into these operational challenges inside of the software world as well with deployments.
And I think I'm hearing what you're saying, because in a consumption-based world, right, like in software as an example, you look at AWS and some of these other ones, if your consumption really spikes, well, you're going to try to get to a new volume, and now let's prepare for there. But then the next month's you're maybe nowhere close. It looks like you're overspending, but you saved because of those peaks. And so tying that into your world, is that where the supply chain really gets hammered or hurt, because you can't actually create a predictability with your suppliers and they don't give you better costs?
Yeah, I maybe should have started here, but I would even level it up from supply chain and say that your value chain gets strained. And so supply chain is a very critical part of that when you have a physical good, but it strains your whole value chain if you're seeing peaks and valleys. So if we continue down the supply chain path, if you very predictably, or at least reasonably predictably, order a certain amount of components from a company or a supplier, they're going to get into that cadence with you. They have that expectation. They're going to serve you well. They can bank on you that they're going to continue to see work, and that's going to happen. If all of a sudden those orders disappear for 6 months, and then you come back with what you had expected to order in the next 6 months, that's going to be very challenging for them to digest, because they've had to do something else. They thought they were going to get those orders, something was going to happen. They were in that cadence, and then all of a sudden it stopped. And so now their management team and their efforts would have been to fill in that part of their own revenue engine. Like that becomes a major revenue problem, right? So now they've gotten creative and they've done something differently, and then you come back with something unexpected. And so now you're dealing with a surprise.
Which is not something you ever want your executive team to know. Is like, they don't want to be surprised.
Exactly.
So when you're, as we're thinking about the bookings, because it impacts a number of things. It impacts your growth in terms of like adding headcount. It impacts your growth of like floor space, or adding new equipment or new lines, or adding new products, or all these different things from, it sounds like, from your side. So when that in predictability, or when it's not predictable,
Mhm.
what are the things that you have to really look into to try to figure out how to make it smoother?
So first and foremost, great example. And so when I talk about confidence, unpredictability erodes confidence, and it one of the biggest challenges, especially when you're trying to grow revenue, is you're investing in something, whether or not that's people or equipment or space or software development in the SaaS world. And if you don't have that predictability, you lose confidence to be able to invest.
Mhm.
So sorry, Carl, I forget what question you asked me.
No, that's all right. Okay, so I'll try it again. As we're thinking about the inconsistency in bookings and what that impact is,
Oh,
so you're looking at it from, I can't add more resources, or
yep.
maybe I can't actually support that customer, or maybe I can't actually get the products, and so that's sort of your world. But then even on the business side as a whole, if the bookings are so spiky,
Yep.
from your perspective, where do you start to look to go, hmm, let's start to figure this thing out? Or where have you had to spend your time and effort to try to
Yep.
figure out where it is so you can smooth that out?
So I think there's two primary areas of focus. So the first is in a deep understanding of your customers. So
Hmm.
if you're in an area where you have unpredictable patterns of sales, you need to invest in deep understanding and deep partnership with your customers. And that sort of flows through to the qualification criteria for your sales team and the questions that you ask and have answers to, so that you can improve your confidence level that even in an uncertain or infrequent bookings pattern, that you can be confident that things are going to happen.
Hmm.
And then I think the second area that you can focus on to try to smooth out your revenue is diversification. And
Hmm.
so what's frequently happens is you can find industries or niche portions of the businesses that you serve that are slightly off cadence. And so whether or not that comes with seasonality of different businesses, different market dynamics with different industries that are in different growth modes at different times. Depending on your industry, it might be northern versus southern hemisphere if it's environmentally related, but you can find ways to very deliberately find things that are off cadence to try to smooth things out.
Hmm. So what I'm thinking of now, of like trying to smooth that out, is starting to go back and looking at where you're winning and where you're losing. And so so have you looked at this from some of the things you're trying to solve? And because it is a challenge, do you go back to even looking at, hey, the types of customers, the types of deals? Hey, you know what? Our pipeline, for sake of simple math, our pipeline, because you work in much larger opportunities, so I'll use examples: 1, 10, and 100.
Yep.
$1 million opportunities, we have an 80% win rate, and we can knock that out within 30 days, as an example. At 10 million, we have about a 50-50 chance. That's going to take us about 4 or 5 months.
Yes.
100 million, we've won one in our entire lifetime.
Yes.
And so do you then go back to look at the pipeline and start to really question, say, hey, you know what, team? We've got 10 opportunities that are in a $100 million case,
Yes.
and you're banking on them. Well, guess what? We've won one in a lifetime. And so do you then go back to them, and do you give your team guidance to say, okay, do a deep dive of where we are
Yes.
and pull that back, because the unpredictability could potentially be because we're focused on the wrong things in our funnel?
So the answer is relentlessly. I have been I've been very fortunate over the course of even the last 2 decades to focus exclusively on aggressive growth organizations, and I think one of the key reasons that growth is successful is the validated learning loop. So
Hmm.
the validated learning loop is something that I'm very passionate about because things are consistently changing as you're trying to grow. You're trying new things. You're building up new infrastructure and initiatives. And if you're not learning, relentlessly learning, and closing that learning loop as quickly as possible, you may be wasting minutes and dollars. And when you're growing, you can't be wasting minutes and dollars. And so to come back to your question about revisiting the sales funnel constantly and understanding where your win rates are highest and why, and more importantly, what have you learned from the opportunities that you have lost, is absolutely critical for building up your cadence and your heartbeat.
So can you let's talk, if we can, the validated. I've not heard validated learning loop before, and I'm curious. How do you think about that? Like, how would you advise somebody to go, look, here's what the validated learning loop is, look at it, and it's tied to all these different things?
Yeah, so the validated learning loop is a concept that was, I would say, probably being made popular by the lean startup. But it's a concept that's existed for longer than that. I'm going to oversimplify my description of it, but when I speak to my team, it's just about creating hypothesis. So we're going to do something. It doesn't matter what it is. We're going to try something. This is what I think is going to happen. That's the critical part. This is what I think is going to happen in a period of time. And then after that period of time, you need to revisit how it actually went and do a gap analysis. So we tried a revenue growth initiative. We're seeking $10 million worth of bookings in this area. This is what we're going to do about it. And the target outcome is $10 million. So when you loop back around to the time frame that you've given yourself, did you hit $10 million or not? And then if you didn't, why? If you did better, why? What worked, what didn't work? And then you build that back into your next step. Far too often, especially with early stage companies, and this is why it was popularized by the lean startup, you try things to just see what happens. And if you try things to see what happens, you're going to see what happens. But you don't learn anything. You don't learn anything actionable to build back into your business and back into your revenue engine.
Yeah, Eric Ries does a great job of that, the lean startup. And now that you said it, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember reading that in the book, but it didn't trigger the validated learning loop. But it's really the hypothesis, try, do, and then learn, right?
That's right.
So how long does that loop, like when you go into that validated learning loop, is that a 2-week thing? Is it a 4-week thing? Like, how are you suggesting your team to look at it?
I think it depends on the position that you have in an organization. So for me, it's rare. Like in my position, it's rare that a validated learning loop would last less than a quarter, because a lot of what I work on is more longer term. But the validated learning loop applies to all things, and so it might be as little as a week. We're going to try something. We're going to see what happens in the week, and then we're going to revisit it. We think this is going to happen. This is what did happen. What did we learn?
Yeah.
So it really depends on what the experiment is or what it is that you're trying to do. The critical part is just making sure that you write down what you think is going to happen. You write down your hypothesis so that then you can compare. You don't just see what happens.
Yeah. And then it's the question of, okay, we tried this, what did we do? And then what can we optimize and learn? And so when you take that and you align it back to the bookings, and is that a little bit more on that? Because is it more in the mentality of like a lean Six Sigma or a Kaizen mentality to try to align it to the bookings? How do you connect the two between like the validated learning loop, the bookings, so we know that we can smooth it out?
So I think that's where you're working through your sales funnel and your forecast, because your forecast is ultimately what you think is going to happen. And you're constantly looking at the activities within that area. So you may have a hypothesis that you're going to move, 20% of your fixed firm proposals forward every month.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, after a month, 15% moved. Why? What happened? What projects did you think were going to move and that didn't? Why didn't they move? What did we learn? What can we do differently next month to make sure that we hit 20? Or how do we adjust our plan because it's actually only 15?
Mm-hmm. And then that is going to coincide with the when you're able to get in from the capital equipment side. What it sounds like is once you get that booking, that kicks off the chain of events to order all the components and getting the supply chain and the
Right.
delivery and then getting people working and all these other things. So
Yes.
that shift of a 5% window, as an example, or the win rate that drops by 5%, that impact is actually felt much larger in a capital equipment than it would potentially be in a SaaS equipment or environment.
Significantly more, yes. So in the world of capital equipment, that cyclicality is quite challenging because the projects that we work on are just so large. So the work that we do is typically between $2.5 to $12.5 million. I've worked on projects that are as large as $250 million. One project, one order. And so the difference between winning that order and not winning that order are so significant to your planning, your organization, your operations, your revenue, that you need to be confident in what's happening in order to confidently invest in the resources that are required to consume those projects.
So if we maybe talk about that a little bit, because the capital world, yes, you'll win the project, so you book it, great, but you don't get all the money up front, right? Like isn't there milestones you have to go as part of, and then there's outcomes that you have to hit certain milestones in order for things to happen.
Absolutely, yeah. So when we land a project, so any project that we do has never been done before, and so we develop a proposal that aligns to a customer's RFQ, and then we will go through a design process in tandem with our partner, with our customer, to make sure that we've designed the right machine. Then we go through the build stage, and then we test the machine in tandem with our customer to say it does what you wanted it to do. Then we take it apart and we actually bring it to their facility and we put it all back together. And then we run a site acceptance test as well to say that now on site, it does exactly what it did at our facility. And so those are the major milestones that happen. So you receive the order, you do design approval, you do a factory acceptance test, and then you do a site acceptance test. And that's our world. And it usually takes about a year, that whole cycle. And then there's payment milestones throughout that are aligned to those major milestones.
And I think this is more challenging in your world than it is in other worlds, because yes, there's a bookings aspect, but there's also a secondary bookings aspect to this too, because if you don't hit a certain milestone, well, then you don't collect the money at that time.
That's correct. Yeah, absolutely.
So
as part of revenue and revenue planning and things like that, that's all very important. And that's why project management is a critical role inside of our world of capital equipment building, because we want to be a good partner for our customers. We want to do what we say we're going to do. So a big part of that is making sure that we can design this machine that's never been designed before in the time frame that we said we could.
Yeah, and as we're talking through it again, I have a little bit of experience in this, but I'm also now starting to think of the growth and related to bookings, because if you win a whole bunch of projects, so you win 10 projects in that cyclicality, you hit that spike, great.
Yep.
And then you try to get everything in and there's a dip in bookings, but you're still trying to solve all those. And along the journey, if some of those milestones don't get hit, well, that booking number doesn't actually translate to the bank account. So then you're another delay. This seems like a much more challenging problem to solve than actually just thinking about it from SaaS, we need to hit this much, this is what we booked, great, and then when it hits the bank account, it's revenue, great, carry on.
Capital equipment, and even physical good production, I would say, is a very different and very more. It has a lot more complexity to it, I think, than SaaS from a revenue generation and revenue engine perspective. Capital equipment and specifically custom automation is challenging. That's a niche challenge for our world. It's not to say that other companies don't have it. It's just what you just referred to is a greater challenge in our industry than it is in others.
So as you're sort of, I'm just realized we're getting close to having to wrap up, and I don't want to miss the opportunities to ask you this. Is so what are the things that you look with or you task your team on to say, hey, look, we need to ensure that we keep a steady bookings number. We want to remove the cyclicality. So what are the things that you would advise somebody to look for, or even like to your team? What are you telling them to be rigorous to ensure that there's no cyclicality, or to minimize, I'll say that way, minimize the cyclicality?
Yeah, I think minimize cyclicality is definitely the right view. I think it starts with having a really deep understanding of your core competencies and what you're really strong at, and making sure that you have an appropriate number of opportunities in that core competency range. Like those are the things that you can be most predictable at. And that's the approach we take as a business, but I think that applies to all businesses. What are your core competencies? What's the center of your bullseye? And depending on what your revenue growth is, how many opportunities do you need in that area in order to have some level of stability? And so first and foremost, that's number one. So number two is making sure that we are building deep partnerships with our customers. We work together for a year. We work together on very complicated things. We work together on design approvals and acceptance tests and installations on that site of very complicated pieces of equipment. And so just making sure that we understand each other, that we have very good relationships, and we can be open and transparent with each other, especially as things get closer to reality, is the second thing that we really focus on as a business. And then the third one is what I had referred to before, is just making sure that after that you have diversification. So there's what you're really good at today, and then there's the things that you want to be good at, or the things that you want to get better at. And so having a measure of success around those other things that you're trying to do around your core as you're working to grow your business and build a consistent and resilient revenue engine, you need those other things as well.
Resilient seems like the word that lands for me, especially in capital equipment, is making sure that it's resilient to handle these challenges. And I'm thinking about it from again, the other challenge of growth and bookings for you in your world, I got to think is like, there's these things called tariffs that have landed that are now being discussed. And then how do you get something somewhere? If you're working on a project that's in Asia, like how do you get the projects? How do you get the stuff there? And how are people going to work on? Like I'm thinking through all the different challenges of all the bookings that you have to solve that are unlike others.
Yeah, that is probably another area that's unlike others. We do send our workforce around the world, and depending on where they're going and the socio-political environment, we'll call it, you have to be very conscious of what's happening and where you're sending people and how you do so in an effective and efficient way in order to support your customers. And then that kind of factors into your revenue planning, your revenue engine as well, because sometimes you may have people and key people who are off in another area of the world doing different parts of the value stream. And that all comes into that sort of idea of making sure that you have a consistent and predictable stream of bookings coming in, because it is a real challenge in the capital equipment world.
And there comes into the top of this of like resource planning, because if you are at these projects and now you got people that are in the field deploying it, well, who's going to work on building it on the front end? And now, do you have the right size team?
Yeah, and we're winding down here. We probably could have started here. For anything to do with revenue, people are the most important part.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what business you're in. It's very rare that you're going to generate a whole bunch of revenue that isn't impacted or doesn't have fingerprints all over it from your team in some way. And so regardless of your industry, your capacity planning is critical. And your capacity planning becomes a very, very difficult task if you don't have some level of consistency with what's coming in the front end.
Yeah, which is a challenge that I've heard many leaders talk about is, just recently had Emmerich Arno, the CEO from Agorapulse, and he was talking about entering a crowded market. They're a social media platform, and they're entering a crowded market when there's a bunch of different players. So how do you get there, and how do you try to get to that first milestone, whatever that milestone is, right? Is a million. And Mark Roberts recently said, he's like, he said to me, he's like, and I'll ask you this: when do you have product market fit? Is it a dollar value? Is it a percentage? Like, is it a number of things in the like? When do you know product market fit? And it's a genuine question, and I could see the correlation to what you're talking about is, well, when do we invest? Well, we've got 10 machines in the field, and that's representative of $100 million because it's 10. Well, now we're going to grow. We should be able to do 10 more machines next year. So we're going to do 20. So now it's cost plus growth to get there, or is it top down, bottom up, like the revenue planning to get there? And I think I'm sort of tying a couple of conversations together, but it's, when does product market fit land for you as a business? And then when do you invest? Because you've got all these other things circling around, not just a dollar value.
Correct. Yeah, and I would say maybe in the context of this conversation, because you could take various different approaches to product market fit, but I think you have product market fit when you have a level of predictability and consistency in your market performance. And coming back to a lot of the early stage companies that I've worked in and helped to build, that can be a very small and very well-defined sliver of a market. But if you're doing something and what you're doing is happening in the way that you thought it would, you're validating your own learning, you're validating your own hypothesis, then I think at that point in time you have product market fit. And then
product market fit seems super easy for you, because you told us about catheters, you told us about needles, you told us about razors, you talked about wearables, you talked about servos, where does product market fit land for you? Because you're in 50 different industries and verticals.
Oh, well, Carl, I wish it was that easy. So it sounds easy when you say it like that, but that in and of itself provides a challenge, because the more specific that you can be about something, the greater your chance of success is at scaling it. And our business in capital equipment is kind of inherently, we are problem solvers. We apply technology to manufacturers and manufacturing problems, and we have certain expertise with different pieces of technology and different partners that can apply to various industries, which is a very good thing, but also can be a very challenging thing to describe.
So basically what I would say to anybody listening to this, if you think your revenue challenges are hard, try running a capital equipment company like Simon and try to figure out all the dynamics of everything that we just talked about today. It's super easy. I got product market fit in this one vertical in medical, but actually there's automotive, and then there's beauty and consumer packaged goods, and when do you get it and how do you handle it, and the different, anyways, all of the things that we've talked about. So it's been fun to do this. I realized to get you out of here, Simon, it's been fun. And I feel like there's a lot more we could have talked about. But for somebody, like, just sort of getting into the wrap up, everybody likes new and nobody likes different. So, but when you do both at the same time, it can cause friction or uncertainty. For somebody thinking about bookings related to restraints, or even their growth related to their bookings related to growth, what are 2 or 3 actionable things you would tell them to say, hey, look for these 2 or 3 things, or do these 2 or 3 things that'll help you create that repeatability or that predictability or resilience, is what you said earlier, to make sure that you hit your numbers and you can grow accordingly?
So I think we touched on 2 things that are worth coming back around to. And to me, I think my biggest piece of advice would be the validated learning loop. If you're trying to build something new, if you're trying to build a consistent revenue engine, whatever initiative you're doing, write down what you think is going to happen and then learn from what actually does. Do not leave it in the world of, let's just see what happens. It doesn't help you. I shouldn't say that. It doesn't help you as much as having a hypothesis and having a validated learning loop.
Right.
And then I think the second one is relentlessly learning from your customer behavior. And so that manifests itself inside the business, inside the funnel. How you're engaging with people and how your opportunities are progressing through your funnel. But you touched on it, Carl. You relentlessly learn from your conversion numbers and what's working and what's not. And what's not working, turn it off. What is working, turn it up. But you have to be relentless about your learning, and you have to be very honest with yourself about what's working and what's not.
Awesome. I think that's a great way to end it. For those people that are like, hey, I'd like to learn a little bit more from Simon, where would you suggest they find you?
Just reach out to me on LinkedIn.
So it's not as easy as LinkedIn, Simon Drexler. There's a few different things in there. So I'll put it up on the screen so everybody can see it. But yeah, Simon is somebody who will talk quite regularly about all of these different things in growing businesses. And hopefully you can hear that there's very much an engineer mind as he's, building sales funnels and running businesses. So it's been fun. Simon, I'm appreciative of our friendship over the more than 10 years. I've learned a lot from you and with you, and I hope we have many, many more years of learning together. And maybe there's a second episode here in the future, but I appreciate you and thank you for doing this, my friend.
The feeling is mutual, Carl. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Hey, it was a lot of fun. And that's going to wrap up another episode of the Revenue Problem Solvers podcast. I want to thank Simon for sharing incredibly invaluable insights today, some strategies you can put into action on Monday. Remember, success leaves clues, and every revenue problem has a solution. Sometimes you just need the right conversation to find it. Until next time, it's Carl, the Revenue Problem Solvers, helping you turn obstacles into opportunities. See you in the next episode.